Kassy Krahn. Welcome to the last part of this tutorial series. In the last video, we went over the letter W, which was a simpler model, and today we're going to get a little bit more complex and add something with a little bit more detail. We're going to use a couple modifiers, and I'm also going to show you how I create foliage cards. And again, we'll be rendering this out in Blender Cycles, and I'll show you all about that.
Alright guys, welcome back. I'm super excited to keep modeling with you. So the first video, we modeled and rendered out this W, and he was a bit of a simpler model to start out with, and this time I'm going to show you how I created the D letter. There's a little bit more going on here. We have some bent geometry. The geometry itself is pretty simple, but there's more variety to the shapes. There's trims, there's these bigger cylinders, there's some different textures, and there's also these sort of flat foliage planes too. So lots of cool stuff to show here. So that's what today's video is going to be. Okay, so here's the final model. You can tell there's a lot of polys because I really didn't want to cheap out because I wanted a super smooth curve here. And really it's just one sort of shape with some different trims that I got away with a lot with just the one model. It's really skewed and sort of tapered and, scaled up or down to create the letter itself. And then, it's combined with these sort of gates and trims, and then I created kind of a simple little like leaf card thing for this upper area. And this model is based on what's called the Singapore Hive, which is a super cool building. As soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted to use it. So yeah, you can see it's a fairly literal translation. Obviously, it's more just up and down, but yeah, adding the combo of these cylinders with the foliage itself, and it was a really fun thing to explore for this challenge. So now I'm going to show you how I actually started to model it. Okay, first thing up, I'm going to just model this cylinder. I mean, it's very simple, but just to show you guys. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to polys here, and I'm going to grab a cylinder. Scale her up, and bring him up. And the base ones I think were down here. These are the first ones, and then I just basically duplicated them and skewed them as I needed. So we want some lines running parallel because I'm basically just cutting the textures in. I'm just using different Lamberts to assign the different colors, which later in Blender I'll alter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edge mode, holding right mouse button, and I'm just going to grab all the edges. Then holding shift, I'm going to go connect tool, and holding middle mouse here, I'm going up to this connect slide, and I'm just going to sort of by eye here throw in some segments. And I think I don't want these to be even because it's just a little bit more interesting if they're a little bit spaced differently. So I'm just gonna sort of play with this a bit. So I have those lines, and the top is definitely beveled. You can see I really smoothed it out, and I did not shy away from adding poly. So holding right mouse button, going to edge mode, I'm going to double click to grab this row. I'm going to hold shift and click right mouse and go bevel. And I'm just going to taper this just so it's nice and smooth. And the same thing here. This is pretty similar to the stuff we did in the last video. I'm going to grab all the edges, holding shift, go right mouse button. I'm going to soften them just so they're nice and smooth. See? And now this part's a little bit boring, but I'm just going to make a few Lamberts and just assign them to the different areas. So I'm actually just going to fast forward this while I do it so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so you can see I have a version of this. Obviously the colors are a little different. I'm just sort of freehanding this so you guys can see what I'm doing. And all of these have a slight taper. I want the top to be a little bit taller just so they're not too symmetrical. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to click the Lattice Tool. And I'm going to reduce the lattice down so it's just the 4. And all you do here, you hold right mouse, you click Lattice Point. And that gets you basic. It's almost like the warp tool in Photoshop, but in 3D. So you can kind of, adjust things. And the more segments you have more control over individual parts. For this, I'm literally just going to grab these and skew them up a bit. And you could do this with soft select too. This is a little bit of an easier way. And I can just sort of adjust as I need. And again, this is kind of like the warp tool in Photoshop, just in, obviously in 3 dimensions. That's just to mix it up a bit. You can see the difference. She might have done it too much. Let's scale it down a bit. Okay, and if you delete history, which is just edit, delete by type history, that just sort of like clears the stuff you've done. So if I clear history, then it's sort of done like this.
Okay, we've got our base shape, and now I want to add this sort of trim on top. If we go back to our reference, you can see it's sort of based on this sort of barricade here at the edge, and I found without it the model felt a little too simple. So it was a nice little detail I could add. So really quickly, it's super simple, but we're just going to grab another cylinder, bring him up, and scale him down. And we're just going to grab the edge here. We're going to grab the face around the edge. So I'm going to click this, double click with shift. I'm going to shift select to do the inverse and delete. And now I'm going to extrude in. And there's a few ways you could do this. It's just the way I'm doing it. I'm going to extrude him out so he's got some thickness to him. It might be a little tall, so I'm going to scale him down a bit. Let's bring him down. It's a bit big. And I want to grab all these long edges here because I want to bevel them to smooth them out. So I'm going to grab them, hold shift, go to bevel, and I'm going to just bring in the bevel. And I'm going to grab all the edges and soften them. Again, I'm just holding shift and right mouse button to get to this menu. I've got the first guy. And this is basically just duplicating them. So let's bring our pivot back to center pivot. Let's move a little bit. And we're going to grab one more. I'm going to duplicate. I'm just clicking Control D again. I'm going to bring him up. He's a little taller and chunkier. So we're going to go into front mode, which again is just spacebar. Grab vert, which is just right mouse button. I'm going to grab these lower guys and just bring them down a bit. And this guy's maybe a little skinny too. That. And really that's it for the actual sort of long banister parts. And next we're going to add these sort of poles in the middle, which add a really nice sort of dense, small micro detail to the overall model. Alright, so we've got our main shape, we've got the banisters. Now I just want to add these tiny poles. So I just put a cylinder here, I just placed it, scaled it down. I want to put the pivot right on the center so that when I rotate it just rotates around the circle and kind of does the work for me. So I'm going to hold D, and then if you click V, D is to move your pivot, V is to snap to a vert. You can see it's sort of snapping along. So I snap it to the central point. Then when I rotate, you can see it sort of uses that as the pivot. And I could sort of angle snap this. I could repeat command, and make it quite symmetrical, but I'm just going to freehand it. So that's sort of the way I approach these models. They are sort of like in that nature. So I'm going to click Control D again to duplicate, and I'm just going to rotate them. Again, I'm not focusing on things being perfect. I'm just going to go around and do this. And I don't want it to be completely symmetrical. And again, there's always different ways to do everything, but this was just the way I did it because I wanted a certain style to it. So just go all the way around, and because I have that pivot in the middle, it makes this a lot easier than individually placing them. Kind of does a lot of the work for me. And again, I'm just doing this sort of quickly just for the demo purpose, but you can kind of tell what's going on. And because it's not terribly dense, what I might actually do is I'm going to grab all of them and combine them. Make sure this pivot's snapped to here. I'm going to actually just duplicate all of them and shift them. So click Control D. It obviously doesn't work everywhere, so I'm going to grab a few that didn't work. Actually, it worked quite well. It's just really that one. Oh, no, we got one more here. And I just sort of made them more dense. And that's really all there was to adding these small little supports here. You can see here. These ones I think I did quite a few more, but you get the idea. And all these ones, these are just the same thing here, but they're just obviously much taller and thicker. So it's really the same process, just grabbing one, centering the pivot to here, and then just rotating it around. So that's really all it was in terms of this sort of trim detail. So next I'm going to start to place these and taper them, and then I'm going to show you how I bent the curve to create this part of the letter. Okay, so I've got my base cylinder, we've got our little trim guy, and I also just kind of took these poles to the side just to make another support. I added these up here because it did feel a little too dense having just the cylinders all the way up. So basically all this was, I'm gonna just put this down, I'll add it after, was just taking this base guy and just starting with him. And just starting to place him, and I'm just scaling him up and down, and I'm gonna Control D to duplicate. I'm gonna rotate him so that the textures aren't looking the same in every spot. I'm gonna bring him down. Again, this is very simple. It's just the same geo everywhere. And it looks like I've got a really skinny one here. You could make a few versions if you want, but I don't really know if it would make a difference. You probably can't really tell in the final. And now I'm going to use my trim. It looks like in this trim I actually only have the bottom bit. So I'm going to actually just delete. I'm going to extract these guys so they're on their own. So if you want to remove a piece from a combined piece, you hold Shift, right mouse button, click Extract Faces. And that will just split these off. I want to combine this so that I basically have two pieces to work with. Again, it's kind of like the last video where I almost have like a kit. And I'm just mashing it together to create the letter. So I'm going to create this. I'm just going to use him. I'm going to center my pivots a little easier to control. I'm going to place him. Looks like I've got some more space between these. And again, it's just sort of scaling up and down and throwing it together. Now I've got these poles, so I'm going to throw these guys up here. And to make sure they're sort of even, I'm going to hold just V because the pivot's already centered. I'm going to take it to the center. That's the advantage of having sort of symmetrical thing. It's really easy to kind of snap things together. And that way it's already kind of lined up for me. And again, just grabbing these. And this just took a lot of trial and error. I just kind of tried different combinations. You can see we're getting a little simpler up here. Just place him. Make him a bit bigger. And looks like we've got these guys again. And that's really all it takes for this this sort of linear guy here. And then next up, oops, I'm going to show you how I'm going to basically duplicate this. I'm going to show you how I added this bend to it. Okay, so now we're going to take the step we've made and we're going to create this bent geo here to create the letter. So all I've done here is I've just duplicated what I just did for you guys. And I'm just going to grab it and I'm going to throw on a bend deformer. So when you find that, you go to under modeling here, you go deform, nonlinear, and there's a bend option. There's a bunch of other options too, but we're going to use the bend option. And I have that on my custom bar because I use it a lot. So we're going to grab that, and I'm going to go into the attribute editor here. I'm going to go to the curvature node here. And luckily, it's actually already bending in the direction we want. You can alter it to bend in different directions, but luckily it's just sort of worked out for us here. So you can see as I do this, and you can really push it. It gets a little crazy if you do, but you can see you can really quickly get that shape. And it's looking okay, but it's a little crunched here. This is a little too tight, and it's not really long enough. There's a little more spacing, and it looks like I've also added some gaps in here so it's not so dense. This is a little bit too much here. So let's undo that and just delete it. I'm actually gonna just delete this guy, and I'm gonna bring this guy down just to give some negative space on the model. Bring him up and scale him up. And again, this was a lot of just back and forth, bending and then going back and adjusting the model. I'm actually gonna add, whoopsie, I'm gonna add a second one, just so there's a little more length here, a little more room for the bend. And this guy is probably too squat. He needs a little more room. So I'm gonna just try that. And let's give that a go. So I'm gonna grab all these, just delete history just out of habit. Put another bend on. Let's see how he goes this time. So it's pretty good. I think I've added maybe one more barricade here, but hopefully for the tutorial you get the idea. And again, you can just go back and forth forever and just kind of keep adjusting your model and then adding the bend deformer. So for now that's okay. So we're just gonna grab him and delete history to kind of get rid of that so that he sort of ends in this position. And now I'm just gonna combine him, or you could group him, and I'm gonna just angle him a little bit. Oops. I'm going to front mode, sorry, so I can sort of see what I'm doing here. Let's get him down a tiny bit. I think I just pushed him back a bit, so there's the crashing's a little less. And it's not perfect, but I mean, when you're in the model, like you can tell it's not perfect. There's definitely some crashing in here, but in the final render, you can't really tell, because it is sort of a front mode, so it's pretty quick to forgive those things. And again, you can already see my models change. I think every time I make this model, it looks a little bit different. This guy looks like he got a little bit bigger in the final, and a lot of it's just going back and sort of tweaking stuff as you go. So that's the bend deformer for this. It's actually quite funny how different these look, but again, it's just for the tutorial. We'll just scale them up a bit. So next up, one thing also is it looks like I added this little guy. That's actually what this trim is for. So I'm just gonna bring him down. This was just like a little cap here. And we're just gonna bring him up, combine, and I'm gonna just snap the pivot again to the center part. So when I scale him down, he just sort of lines up automatically for me, which is really nice. Oopsie. So there's really our model, and again, it is kind of funny how different they look, but if you really took the time, you could match it up much better, I'm sure. So the last part of this is to create these foliage cards, which are again really simple, and they're just flat colors, but it added a nice little bit of hint of color, and I like the combo of this sort of structural with this organic bit. So next I'm going to model that out for you, and then we'll just place them, and that's really it for Maya, so stay tuned please. Alright, so the last thing we need to do is make some of these leaves. So these are probably a little higher quality than they need to be, but again, that wasn't really a concern for this project. So I'm just going to grab a plane, so just some polymodel in here. And I'll just bring him down and make him just one segment for now. Actually, no, make him two. Let's rotate him. And to start off, I'm just going to grab a multi-cut tool, so I'm holding shift and right. I'm going to click multi-cut, and that's just a way to cut into geo. And I'm just going to close this up. I'm going to go into face mode, holding right mouse button, and delete the inverse. And I'm going to bring these verts down a bit. We're just making our leaf card here. So I'll just bring this down a bit. I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to bevel this, so holding shift and the right mouse. And we're going to make it a few segments. Again, this is probably more than we need, but that's okay. And then we're just going to extrude this. The leaves are actually made of geo, they're not flat cards, because again, geo is not really a budget so much for this in render. So I'm just going to add some thickness. And you can bevel the sides if you want. I guess maybe I will just for the sake of this, just so they're nice and smooth. And then we have like a sort of little leaf. I'll scale him way up, it's really small. You can see here, they're sort of on a stem. So I'm going to make a cylinder. Bring it up here. And I'm just going to, it doesn't really matter, but change the verts there. Bring this down. I just have like one long stem. So make them like that. And I'm going to go into edge mode and holding shift and right mouse, I'm going to do the connect tool again like I did earlier. I don't need nearly as many this time. And I'm just going to go into vert mode and I'm going to just scale this down a bit so we kind of are making our twig here. I'm also going to just bend him a bit just so he's not totally straight. And let's move this pivot up to the top. So holding D and then V for invert. I'm just gonna snap the pivot here so that I can just rotate from the top. It's a little easier to control. You can see we have a few sort of variations here. So I'm probably gonna make 2 sort of sets. So I'm gonna duplicate this. This is probably a little big. So I'm just gonna scale him down and I'm gonna just start making these little clumps. And I'm just rotating, clicking Control D to dupe, and I'm just gonna start creating a little kind of shrub here. Just bring him back a bit. These guys are probably too far away. And this will probably only be seen from the front, but it's still good to make them angled and interesting so they get nice shadows. And I'm just gonna like scale some up, some down. This one might be a little more sparse, and I'll make a fuller one next. And then we're just gonna use these 2 sort of kits to populate that top section. Maybe I'll actually delete that one. That looks okay. So that's sort of our more minimal one. I'm gonna scale this. We'll add one more here. So there's sort of one clump. Actually, I'm gonna delete this and just use this as a. And I want one that's maybe a little fuller. So we're just gonna kind of build on what we just did. And you could really spend some time on this. I think I only made 2 variations for this image. And generally that is enough, but again, you can always make more. So just continue. It's a lot easier if you have the pivot at the top, because if you have the pivot centered, it can be a little awkward to rotate. Definitely save some time adjusting the pivot early. One more here. So we sort of have 2 clumps here. So looks okay. It definitely looks a little different. These look a little wider. And again, of course, every time you make something, it can always look a little different, but for the sake of this tutorial, that's all right. So I'm just gonna combine these, and I'm gonna put the pivot at the top so I can sort of do the same thing as before, just with the entire piece. My 2. Let's just assign a new green shader to this, just for the sake of this. That's a little dark. Okay. And now it's just, so you can see in the, here's my reference here. See in the reference, they're sort of only on the tops, a little bit on the sides here, but definitely they're a little bit clustered and they're not all over the place. That's why I decided to sort of keep them just on the top part here. I didn't put them anywhere else. Also, it's a bit of a focal point that way. So let's just move these to the side. And we'll duplicate them so we sort of have a backup. And I'm gonna just start, I'm gonna hold V so I can just snap this up to the top here. Oops. And these might be a little bit big. I might take this, I might even scale it down, just so you can really try to break the fact that, you know, these are being repeated. You don't want it to look repetitive. And see, I'm just starting to add these. And yeah, you could make a few different versions. I should probably have made a shorter version for filling, which I could still do. I mean, I could even just go in. I should just do that right now. Just delete this edge. bring this guy up. Oops. Now I have sort of another version here. Again, you're just trying to kind of reuse stuff to save time. I'm kind of layer them. Angle them out a bit. It's nice when you can kind of sort of layer them because it adds to the shadows of them when they overlap in the render. And they're a little bit all straight. I'm going to just start angling them out a bit. And this part can take a little bit, but you can kind of get into the rhythm of it. These look a little too stiff. Let's just angle them a little at a time. So hopefully you get the idea. So I'm going to just finish this and then show you the finished model, and then we're going to actually just bring this into Blender and get it ready to render. Okay guys, so I finished up the foliage on my own just because it is a bit time consuming, and I just exported it as an FBX and I brought it into my Blender scene. And it's pretty funny seeing them side by side, how different these shapes are. I mean, obviously the skewing and scale when I bent this, it really did make a difference on this side, but it always turns out a little bit different every time you do it, which is quite funny. But this process is very similar to the last video where I'm just centering it here, and I'm just using the Lamberts that I assigned in Maya. That's the easiest way to really quickly assign in Blender, because I can just take these, so you can see here, and I can really quickly, you know, find which colors I'm using and just adjust as I need. So this is just a matter of going back and forth and just deciding, you know, what should go where. And really all I'm playing with here is the base color, the metallic, and the roughness. So you can sort of see these metal bits here. And it's just going through them all and just trying to find, it's a combination of what colors work, but then also in terms with the lighting. You can see the difference between, my lighting is very pink. So if we look up, I've got two lights here. I've got this guy here on, he's quite like sort of peachy pink, and you can really see how that it changes the render. So if I change this, you can see how much that is actually affecting the image in the end. So it's a lot of a combination of adjusting your Lamberts and also your lights to kind of find that happy medium. So just like last time, I got a directional light, which is sort of like a soft yellow. This really strong, I just like quite strong sort of pink lighting in my images in general, so that's why I chose that. And then this sort of back guy, he's usually in like a contrasting color, so a blue. And last time I had him more straight on, but I wanted this really strong shadow here because I wanted this foliage area to really sort of be the focal point. So that's why he's kind of angled back. If he was more straight on, this would have a little more fill light, but I wanted to stay away from that. So once again, you can see this Z fighting here, but I've done the same sort of hack trick, which is probably maybe not the best practice, but it sort of worked for what I was doing, where I've duplicated the mesh and just put a flat white texture on it. And it adds these nice little highlights to the left. And this is something that doesn't always work, but I actually used it for quite a bit of the letters I did for this challenge, just to get that sort of stylized silhouette. You can really see it right in there. So that's something else I added, but that's really all it is. It's mostly in the modeling, and then just tuning the lighting, tuning the Lamberts, and tuning really the background color. I mean, you can see how much this image would change if I changed this backdrop, right? I mean, something like that could be quite cool, but it's really just going back and forth, doing some test renders, getting your lighting, and that's really all there is to it. So I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this sort of mini series. It was a lot to pack in, so hopefully it didn't go too quickly, but I hope you guys learned something, or you want to jump into Maya or Blender. It's really fun, and once you get the hotkeys down, it goes really quick, and you'll just want to make tons of different things. So hopefully this was a nice sort of introduction to that, and a bit of insight on this challenge that I did, and how I made all these models. So again, my name's Kassy Krahn, and I really I'm glad that you guys got to the end of this video, and I'm always posting stuff, so please, if you want to follow me or see my work, you can check out my website or my Instagram or Behance, and hopefully we'll be doing more of these in the future. So have a good one.